Okay, we're going to go to more of a roundtable format, and you need not wait until the end of the conversation. If there's something you want to raise your hand and ask about, please feel free to do so. I'll get this discussion started, though, a little bit, and let me touch on something where we've heard somewhat, I think, somewhat different messages from two of you. Paula, you talked a lot about mobility and the fact that if there's a point at which it all becomes too much and people may be tempted to go elsewhere. Bob points out that while that's true, Chicago competes pretty well in a knowledge economy because of some of the civic assets we have here, et cetera. In your view, Paula, what is that point at which people get up and go, and how close to it are we right now?
That's a tough one. I listened to Governor Christies' ad on the radio the other day enticing Illinois-based businesses to relocate to New Jersey, and tried to think about circumstances under which firms would want to do that. Was the recent hike in the personal and corporate income tax rates enough? And you know, there's always going to be some individuals or businesses right on that margin, and raising the rate will just pull those people across the line. It's hard to know in any particular instance what's too much. And certainly, you know, the city and the region have held their own in terms of population growth over the last, certainly over the last 30 or 40 years, but in the last decade in particular. There's a lot of exciting things going on within the city limits. But I think getting the schools, getting the finances, getting fiscal stability in place is really going to be important in order to attract people for the long run.
And Bob, I'm curious, as you've looked around other markets, you've looked in depth, as we pointed out, in the Puget Sound area, Cleveland, which would seem to be a place that might have some interesting comparisons to Chicago, the Twin Cities, and other places. How is Chicago and Illinois, how are they stacking up today? Are the civic assets we have here so attractive that it almost doesn't matter how many jurisdictions we have and what sort of income tax we're paying, or are we at a point of potential danger?
I appreciate that you're trying to identify the distinctions and set up an active discussion here. I'm happy to get in a fight, particularly with Chris, with whom I've for many years benefited from arguing. I think you're focused on the tax structure in a particular component of the city that I'm not saying is an attractor.
Right. No, right.
And so the difference here is that I'm focused on a broader scope of things that I think is a net attractor still. Right. On the tax thing, I was quoted in the papers saying it's not a deal killer, that the businesses that are kind of hysterically saying the whole game is to cut taxes and compete on low taxes are just wrong for a city like us, and they know it. You know, mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that we don't have a mess that we have to fix. Mm-hmm. And from my point of view, the issue is what you spend the taxes on. It's whether you're getting value-added for them. And we have a huge problem that we have, especially at the state level, that we've been wasting enormous amounts of tax money. And there's no nicer way to put it. You know, so that it's not. We're at that moment where we kind of had to raise taxes because we had no alternative at a state level. And we now need to figure out how to use them well and not have to keep raising them.
Right.
Let me just say one more thing. I'm sorry. Ultimately, you know, we erased a huge deficit under the Clinton administration. I'm not arguing this because of him or not, but the fact is, ultimately, we're in a particular dire condition because the economy's at such a bad moment, and it's going to turn. It is turning, and part of this problem or this gap will get addressed as we grow our way out of it. And growing our way out of it means investing in the things that create long-term value and grow the economy, and not just in financial manipulation and other kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's go to the question of the multiple taxing districts, et cetera. I'm wondering, when a person moves into this area, they probably don't realize they're dealing with all of these many taxing districts. Likewise, when a company selects a place to do business, selects a corporate headquarters location or a regional headquarters location, that's not part of the decision making, or perhaps it is at some level. Do you think that we're talking about there's a material cost that is, if nothing else, creating friction negative friction when companies or individuals look at moving to Chicago? Is it material?
Surely it's material. I mean, so companies are much more likely to know these things than individual people are. They have much more incentive, you know, especially a big company considering a big relocation is going to have much more incentive to know these answers than an individual person would. I don't think we have good ways of measuring, a sort of a counterfactual, how many companies would have moved here if our tax structure has been different. I don't think we know exactly, but you know, as Paula said, we're already seeing advertisements from other states trying, it's not just New Jersey, other states trying to lure our businesses there, and surely some will move. And you know, back to your first question about when is sort of the breaking point where we might see people leave, don't forget Ed Glazer's slide showing that we have lost 20% of our population relative to 1950. So it's not as if the question is, well, when might people start leaving Chicago? People left Chicago. It has more or less stabilized, as Paul alluded to. I mean, starting in the 90s, really, perhaps not coincidentally, starting roughly around the time Mayor Daley took office in the 90s onward, we've more or less stabilized. We're not growing radically by any margin, but we did lose 20% of our population. Now, it wasn't only because of these reasons, but surely, you know, the perception of inefficient government and overspending and bad services was a part of what was burdening Chicago during those years when so many people were leaving.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Because if I understood it right, Ed's slide was of the city, not the region. And so when I say city, I'm talking region. He said there were two causes, one was suburbanization. Do you know whether the region lost population in that time?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No. I think a lot of it was exodus of the city to the suburbs, but even the region was relatively flat. I mean, it's not, by contrast to like the, you know, other areas you've worked, like in the Pacific Northwest or such.
I'm wondering, Christy, you also, I think, more or less posited that these small government units are per se inefficient compared to, you didn't draw the comparison, but I'm wondering if you would, say a unified government such as Indianapolis has. Are those per se more efficiently run than?
No, I don't think you can say that. You know, what I was trying to get at towards the end of my talk is this trade-off between the desire to have many and potentially small jurisdictions that could compete with one another. That we have good reason to believe enhances efficiency. We want people to have choices, and we want each government to worry about the fact that its property owners and taxpayers have choices, and the fact that those people might leave is an incentive for the government to operate better. My point is that the sort of small governments that I'm critiquing, these small taxing jurisdictions, are not competitors. They are overlapping layers, and so I can't say, oh, I'm so sick of the way the schools are in Chicago, I'll move to Chicago. The city and the school district don't compete with one another, and that's the sense in which I worry about. We're getting a multiplication of governments in a way that we have no reason to think should lead to efficiency. Whereas, as I've suggested, if there was, you know, one government that had to make trade-offs across these things, they'd have to think about, well, how much is it worth to people to spend more on schools relative to the environment, or relative to parks, or the other things on which we have also demands from people.
Okay. Let me put us in a present political context. We're a few less than a month away from a mayoral and municipal election. We're going to have a new mayor, obviously. We don't yet know who that mayor is, but there will be one. So things will change in a lot of different ways. But a few things that won't change include some of the slides that Paula showed us. The city's budget deficit is going to be what it is. Certain civic assets already are leveraged. The pension problem is not going to go away overnight. If you were a mayor coming in and you, say, wanted to do what FDR did when he took over as president, and you wanted to start off with 100 days of activity, tell me what the first 3 items of business would be if you were to, the day after you're sworn in office. And Bob, will go to you first. You look eager. You looked eager to answer that question.
I was looking at Paula. She knows the answer to that. So the question is, what are the first 3 activities?
Yeah.
If you have
In your first 100 days, let me phrase it slow. So what is of such immediate importance that it needs to be addressed immediately, and what could be put on the back burner? Let's put it that way.
So I think let me divide this into 2 types of things that I think are iterative. There's substantive areas you need to focus on, and then there's the institutional development. You need to focus on them well. And The substantive areas I would identify are human capital, innovation, ecostructure. I'm going to go more than 3 and then come back. Spatial efficiency, clusters, what industries we focus on, and governance. The institutional, I mean, those are kind of the 5 strategic areas we talk about as ways to organize your thinking about and intervene in cities. And in Chicago, we have huge opportunities soon in the interaction of human capital, innovation, and selected clusters that we need to focus on, we need to get more strategic about. Institutionally, and I don't know how to do this yet, but so that would be, the second thing would be to figure out how to bring the equivalence that the private sector has creative destruction. You know, and this is a harsh thing to say if someone comes out of a community organizing background. But in the private sector, if a firm's not functioning, it dies, and that's a good thing. In the civic sector, in the public sector, that's not the case. Our governments proliferate, we don't have a way to eliminate them. Our nonprofits proliferate, and they may have done their job, but we have all these fiefdoms institutionally that are kind of self-protecting and perpetuating. We need to find ways to evaluate and consolidate and eliminate where necessary and allow for innovation in those 2 sectors too.
Either the other you have thoughts?
I think the biggest issue came up already in the panel this morning on education, and you know, because I'm interested in the proliferation of jurisdictions, it's the fact that the school district, although sort of technically a separate jurisdiction from the city and a separate budget, it spends more than the city. Okay, so there's the fiscal problems of the school board are bigger, I think, and we already had this diagnosed by our panel this morning on education, that something's got to give with respect to the labor costs in the school board. The fact is that if you look over the past couple of decades, the appreciation of spending in the Chicago public schools has been about twice the rate of inflation, whereas a lot of other governments have managed to keep roughly on pace with the rate of inflation. The school board has been about twice that, and the numbers are just so big there. Those dollars are so big relative to everything else. I don't see any major progress happening at a regional level until that gets under control. And the mayor has sort of limited ability to do things there, but has to find a way to get it done.
Paula?
Sure. Well, to counter Bob a moment, I don't have the answer, but I have an answer of how I'd spend my first 100 days. On day 1, I would appoint that CEO of the public schools. That's what I learned at the morning session. And I agree with Chris's points about the school district it's huge, you know, in terms of its claim on property tax dollars. Schools account for twice as much of the property tax money that you're paying in compared to the city per se. So, you know, schools are really where it's at in that regard. For the other 99 days, I think I would turn my attention to both the contractual relations with the current city workforce and with dealing with the pension problem. I think that taking serious and substantive action to limit the growth in future liabilities of these funds is essential. And I think by doing so, a mayor would send a very strong signal to the city and the business community and people throughout that we're going to have a sturdy and predictable financial environment in which you can come and live and work and do business in Chicago. And until we get those problems sort of addressed, everything else is going to seem a little bit tenuous.
Okay. We've been advised that because of the weather conditions, we're going to cut this panel quite short. We promised the audience would be able to ask questions, and we're going to ask, throw it open to a question. We've got somebody in back with one and with a microphone, so we'll go there first. And we're going to cut this panel short. We're going to take a brief 5-minute break, and then Brad Keywell, who's here, will address the audience, and we're going to let people get home and I guess race to the trains, and I hope nobody drove in this morning. But anyhow, the question back here?
Yes, I just first want to say thank you for all the information today. And my question is directed at Professor Berry, specifically the competition within government. If you could actually elaborate on exactly how you would or think about the best way to enact such a policy. Would it be competing for the money? Would it be competing for some kind of goal of where there's a bar of effectiveness that must be reached to stay viable as a program. Just generally kind of some more detail on the competitiveness within the government.
I wasn't able to hear too well the first part of your question. You're asking, is there a way we could have a more sort of technocratic way of measuring efficiency in our local governments to hold them accountable?
Yes, elaborate on exactly what you mean by competing between the agencies within government.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The sort of competition that I think we're most familiar with in local government, and it's considered most efficiency enhancing, is the competition across jurisdictions, meaning across municipalities. So the threat that someone from the city of Chicago might move to the suburbs if things are not going well, the threat that someone in one suburb might move to another if the schools are not up to snuff, that's the competition that I think we all want to have. And so that's why I say we don't want to just jump to a complete consolidation of county-wide government in the way that we've seen done some other places in the country, because you're going to lose that part of the proliferation of jurisdictions that's in fact really healthy to have. What I'm saying is, by the flip side, when you have a bunch of governments doing a single function, but piled on top of each other, they're not competing with each other. In fact, they're not competing with anyone. And that's the sense in which I think some form of consolidation, what I was suggesting is sort of removing tax authority, independent tax authority from those kind of jurisdictions, would be a more healthy form of consolidation that stops short of just the full-scale unigov sort of proposal that you see elsewhere, that I think would sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater.
And you jammed your finger up in the air. We'll take one more question.
Are the pension obligations enshrined in the Constitution of Illinois?
Question is, are the pension obligations enshrined in the Constitution of Illinois? And
Well, I'll take a crack at it, but I'm not an attorney, and I haven't sort of worked it up myself. And there are a number of people who have different views on this. In brief, my understanding is that the Constitution protects the pension benefits that have been accrued and already earned by former employees, and so retirees, and also current employees, their benefits earned up until today. What is not clear is the future benefits earned by people who are currently employed. That's a little murky, apparently.
And another issue is there's a development in Congress in the last few weeks in which Congress is looking at change. The states can't currently declare bankruptcy, but Congress is looking at a bankruptcy-like procedure by which states could try to abrogate certain obligations they have. But until that happens, I think Paula correctly characterized the situation in Illinois. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we were just getting into this great panel. I wish we were Oprah and we could go to the green room and webcast it, but we're not Oprah. And thank you. I'd appreciate it if you could thank our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.